What's up, ladies and gentlemen? Johnny Mack here. Just wanted to give you a heads up that if you are looking for a community that is open to discussion as far as mentorship, conservation, the wild, becoming a better person, and all of that, there is a group for you on Facebook, and it is called Soul Seekers. Soul Seekers, we are all about making ourselves a better person. We're all about making sure hunting lasts for generations to come and encouraging people to get plugged in. Whether you are someone who has something to give or someone who needs to soak it up like a sponge, this is a community for you, and I strongly encourage you that if you're on Facebook to join Soul Seekers, and if you're not on Facebook, hop on there just for that group. It is only going to be as powerful as we all make it. And so just remember that life happens for you, it doesn't happen to you, and that you can't outgive good. You can't outgive good, people. I want you to understand that, and I want you to believe it, because when we believe that and we lead with courage and we lead with intention, lives are changed, lives are transformed, just like on this podcast, transformation through primal adventure. Be blessed. Enjoy this episode. Talk soon. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack. Through this podcast, I'm on a mission to transform lives through primal adventure and to spread my mission of mentorship as conservation. This podcast is powered by Washington Backcountry, a resource for all hunters, both new and old. To find out more about Washington Backcountry, go to wabackcountry.com or search for Washington Backcountry on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube. The Soulful Hunter Podcast is also proudly presented by the Crazy Elk Company. Based out of the state of Washington with products made in America, they are providing solutions with gear to problems you didn't even know you had. Their tag wallet is one of those solutions, and I had the pleasure of using it on all of my hunts this last year, and it is now a mainstay in my kill kit. The tag wallet is a water-resistant zippered pouch that comes with its own reusable zip ties to safely and securely store your notch tag for quick and easy access. For more information, go to crazyelkcompany.com and use the code SOULFUL with a capital S to save 20% at checkout. Be blessed, everyone, and as always, stay soulful. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of the Soulful Hunter Podcast. I'm your host, Johnny Mack, and today I am joined by somebody who has captivated my attention and really someone who is standing up for conservation and hunting and the outdoors and the legacy that we have with that. And somebody, when I've checked out their social media, I was like, I want to know more about this person. And that is our guest today, Gabriella Hoffman. Gabriella is the host of the District of Conservation podcast and an award-winning outdoor writer. She's an angler, gun owner, and a newer hunter. So I want to hear her story, and hopefully you, through hearing her story, get motivated and inspired to go out and impact lives across this country. Gabriella, thank you so much for joining me for an episode of Soulful Hunter.
Really excited to speak with you, Johnny, and to share my story with your listeners.
I love it. So you are a newer hunter, is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. I'm part of what is kind of this group called adult onset hunters. It sounds like a disease, like an onset of a disease, but it's not. It's just kind of a formality in terms of it. But yes, I began hunting, formally speaking, in adulthood. I successfully had my first hunt. When was I? How old was I? I was 26 going on 27. It was 2017, December 2nd. I remember the exact date where I fully transformed into a hunter because I had gone to some like practice events, like I did beagling here. So you hunt with beagles as they chase rabbits and hares. And so that was kind of my first hunting trip in a sense. Like it didn't involve any shotguns, but it was us using beagles to essentially hunt. So that was kind of interesting. But my real successful trip, and I'd gone on some unsuccessful trips as well, afterwards and leading up to this. But I would say that defining moment of me becoming a hunter officially was December 2nd, 2017. So I haven't really been able to hunt as frequently as I've wanted to, even since that time. I've had success. I think maybe I'm like at a 50-55% success rate with my hunting trips. I don't think it really matters what percentage, as long as you're having fun in the field. But I've had some good times in the field where I've been successful and I've gotten something to take home and eat. And then there have been times where I haven't or I didn't see anything. And you learn through all of those experiences, the successes, the misses, and the kind of ambivalent experiences where you're scouting and you see nothing, you just hear noises and you just enjoy the scenery. And so for me, it wasn't really anything unusual. I think most people sometimes come to hunting because they disliked it. They had a conversion and they saw the light and they're like, yes, I support this type of activity. I've always been kind of receptive to hunting. It may be stemming from my, I would say, family background. My family is from Eastern Europe. We have a long line of meat eaters in my family, and I've always been exposed to unique cuts of meat. I've always eaten like cow tongue or liver, kind of unusual parts of animals that people don't like to eat. That's something we kind of do from the with those of us with ties to Eastern Europe. Although I'm American born, but my parents were always like, "You should try this cut of meat. You'll like this sausage. You'll like this." And I've always had maybe like a mixture of game meat incorporated into like some sausage in kind of the Eastern European delis in Southern California. They would always sell like some type of sausage or hard cheese or something of that nature. Hard cheese is not meat, sorry. Or head cheese, that's the more appropriate term. That's like kind of a gelinated kind of like meat. It has jelly and you can put it on a sandwich. And sometimes those offerings would be infused with wild game meat. I remember one, I think it was some hard salami. It was infused with like black bear meat or something of that nature. So I always had like some exposure, but I never really was able to go hunting because my dad didn't really do hunting. He assisted my uncle once in a trip back in the old country with some field dressing of a moose because my uncle was able to access some really cool areas to do it. It was forbidden for most of the public, but he was a police officer, so he had special privileges, and my dad accompanied him on the hunt, did a little of that. But in California, the culture really wasn't as inviting. I mean, there is hunting in Southern California and Northern California, especially, but I grew up in a highly suburban area. Most of the hunting experiences you had to go away, like towards the desert or to go long distances. We mostly did fishing. So, fishing was kind of the first activity I did. And I picked up shooting sports. And then after that, I was like, okay, now I can finally hunt because I moved away from California to a region. Surprisingly, the DC metro area is a place where you'll find a lot of hunters because it's kind of the epicenter of policymaking. Policymaking here obviously affects all different states across the country. And there are a lot of hunters here, is something I learned and discovered throughout my time in DC so far. I've been in the DC area in Virginia for about a decade now. And it's weird coming here, I was able to pick up hunting and not so much back in California. And also, I think being self employed, being able to determine my schedule, I was able to say I should probably set aside some time to learn how to hunt. I have more flexible arrangements. I can go with people to the field to learn. I could do my hunter's education course remotely. And so I think being a young adult, when I was in my late 20s, it presented itself a unique opportunity for me to hunt because I already had kind of a latent interest in it. And then I had some friends who were very influential in trying to motivate me to learn hunting. I picked up some mentors along the way through my outdoor riding endeavors. And it's kind of been history ever since. And I don't think I'm going to do any hunting this spring with turkeys because here in the southeast especially, we're seeing some kind of big diminishment of turkey numbers. But I'm hoping sometime in the fall, maybe some more deer. But it's been an interesting journey so far, and to be fully immersed in it can allow me to be a better reporter and a writer when writing about hunting. So I think it's extremely important to be immersed in these activities to really grasp what they mean and what their importance is.
I love that. You use some words that I use quite often on this podcast. Number one, that's transformation. You transformed into a hunter because on this podcast, I always talk about transformation through primal adventure. It's not changing us. We're transforming, we're molding, we're shifting into that. We're stepping into the power in which we were given as human beings on this planet. One of the things I think really fascinates me about you is the fact that you started writing about hunting before you actually started hunting. Is that correct?
I did a little bit actually before I formally began to hunt. I did some freelance writing originally in the end of 2015, early 2016 with Wide Open Spaces. And I was reporting on stories about hunting even before I started to formally participate in it. So a little bit before my actual participation, I was starting to write about it kind of from the legislative standpoint of really interesting.
So, Gabriella, one of the things that really interests me is when I learned that you actually started writing about hunting before you actually started hunting. So, you're an outdoor writer, When was this shift that you were like, I'm going to start putting my focus and attention on writing about the outdoors and hunting versus when you actually started picking up hunting? And then where has it taken you since?
Great question that you posed. I started like a year or so before I officially began to hunt, and I was kind of kicking the can down the road on wanting to do my hunter's education. I had said I'm going to do it now that I'm self-employed in the summer of 2016. I held off a little bit on it. Then I did some beagling, which was a lot of fun. It's hunting with beagles while they chase rabbits. And you're not really using firearms, you're just using and deploying the dogs to go hunting on your behalf. Didn't see any rabbits get caught. We did see a rabbit outsmart the beagles, which was really fascinating. But writing, I would say a little bit before I was immersed in it myself, gave me kind of basics, but I recognize like I'm not really understanding it or I'm not really fully grasping it if I'm not partaking in it. It's theoretical. And when something is theoretical, you don't have a full grasp of it. That's kind of what my logic for taking an interest in firearms was, which I did about a decade plus ago. And I took an interest in it. I understood that people were misinterpreting legislation, the motivations for gun ownership, and what leads people to buy guns. And now we see a lot of people buying guns for self protection reasons. They can't rely on law enforcement. There's lots of limitations, and having a gun can help fill those voids. And same with hunting. I kind of had seen the media coverage surrounding different cases, like Cecil the Lion, which is kind of an extreme case or kind of a way, way, way out there case. And then I saw a lot of anti hunters in media, a lot of celebrities, in fact, even apply that same outrage towards deer, bear, and commonly hunted species. And when just different news stories were coming up, that's when I said, I need to take an interest in this. And then with my kind of latent interest to go hunting, with my general support of it, not antagonism towards it, but being open minded to it from a very, very, I would say, early time, to wanting to actually fulfill my desire to learn how to hunt and go into the field and experience what everyone had told me about. It was like I said, a short window between when I started writing and then when I actually became a hunter on, or transformed into a hunter, like you said, on December 2nd, 2017. And it wasn't really difficult to transition in that way or to balance that out or to take an interest. I already had the interest there. And then once I started going into the field, I started to have a greater grasp of it and kind of affirm kind of the knowledge that I was told, see how conservation dollars go to supporting habitat restoration efforts, wildlife conservation efforts, and hunters education courses. I was seeing where all those monies were going to, even indirectly through the licenses that I was buying. My contributions by no means are significant. I'm one of many millions of people who purchases licenses and purchases guns, but even your little contribution can go a long way to replenishing kind of the coffers of your state. So in Virginia, every state like this is like this. All those monies that you pay into conservation, whether it's through buying guns and ammunition or licenses, bow archery, tackle, what have you, from two different laws that go into it, you get to see those monies come back to your state and go towards stocking for fish programs. You get to see that for habitat restoration efforts, opening up new lands for access, things of that sort. And seeing that all kind of before me, I was like, okay, this is cool. We have a lot of private land. We're a largely private land state. I think maybe 16% of Virginia is public land. And we have an area close to me, a wildlife management area that's supposed to be really good for actually mushroom hunting and even deer hunting. But sometimes that's a little bit of a deterrent because with it being public land so close to Washington, D.C. area, a lot of people traffic it and it's a highly pressured area if you want to go hunting normally. But you can recognize and you can find different public land areas, even close to a metropolis like where I live, and it's available. But I was able to actually have success and talk about my successes hunting on private land in some different various blogs and then some bigger outlets. And for some of the bigger outlets I've written for like Field and Stream and Outdoor Life, I really didn't talk about my own story. I was usually working with them on an assignment basis. So I've worked with different editors where some will give me complete creative freedom to choose what I want to write about. Others will assign you topics. And for kind of the more established publications, two of them, one of the others that I used to write for Sporting Classics Daily, their online publication, I used to be able to pitch them and write whatever I wanted to in the year that I wrote for them. And so it just depends on the editor who you work with. And so I was able to write about different experiences or conferences I went to. I wrote about the Virginia Fly Fishing and Wine Festival. I talked about bear conservation in the Mountain West. And one of my earlier pieces I did for Sporting Classics at the time, I entered it into this Pinnacle Awards with the Professional Outdoor Media Association, where I serve as a board of director for the last year. I have a 3-year term. Term expires in 2024. And I submitted that piece, never thinking it would get considered as a finalist or whatever. It was just my first year. And after entering it, I learned I was a finalist. And then when time came for the awards, I learned I won the top conservation. There's 2 awards. There's like the first prize winner, and then there's a runner up. I learned that I'm the first prize winner in conservation for my reporting on grizzly bears, judicial review, judicial activism, of politics kind of interfering with wildlife conservation efforts. So I always look for those interesting hooks. And I was, even if I don't hunt, if I wasn't hunting at the time, because I'm not going to hunt grizzly bears, I think most people will not hunt grizzly bears, even though we support the management. So even with just my general understanding of conservation laws at work, my general interest in supporting hunting as a conservation tool where appropriate, whenever appropriate. I could even write about stories talking to people who do this work on the ground firsthand. I was able to talk to 2 bear hunters who work very closely with wildlife biologists, and they told me their opinions on this. So I was able to channel kind of my firsthand experiences and then the firsthand experiences of others who I trust and can look to as firsthand sources and incorporate their musings into my pieces. So it's kind of, a double prong in that respect. And so, but certainly my personal experiences have largely shaped what I can write about now, even if I don't necessarily hunt. If I meet people who hunt, if I talk to experts who study certain apex predators, or I talk to people who work more closely in conserving elk or something of that nature, I look to that. Or like for a firsthand experience, I haven't hunted elk before, but I've seen Virginia's elk herd. I've seen what the stakeholders have done in my state, our Commonwealth, with restoring elk population. So I can even see a place, the habitat firsthand without hunting it and understanding what was going on there. So I think just going to different places, speaking to different individuals, and then also me firsthand experiencing hunting, I think you can look at all those things situationally and extrapolate information from that and incorporate it into your writing. And obviously, I want to be able to have more firsthand experience saying that I've tried to pursue elk. Maybe I wasn't successful. Maybe I will be successful, and try that for other species. I've done duck hunting, upland bird hunting, deer hunting, and I can't think what else. But I think those basics, for the most part, are covered. And those are pretty common species here in Virginia. We have to, unfortunately, what is it? With upland birds, we don't have natural habitat. Our habitat, unfortunately, is not as prevalent as it used to be for a lot of upland birds. So they have to create kind of artificial settings, kind of like enhanced pen raised type of bird settings. And that's okay. People still have fun. You pay the licenses for your small game and you just enjoy it. But we have naturally occurring species, like I said, with deer. You could do trapping if you wanted to. So we have a lot of available species. But unlike some places, we don't have some really cool species like bighorn sheep or such a big herd of elk. But we are starting to get more and more elk as they start to adapt and to flourish here a bit more. But it's a good environment. And yes, I think using my firsthand experience more as I start to do more trips, I think will really be effective in my journalism endeavors. And I think more people who write about hunting and fishing, people in mainstream media outlets, they are losing out on understanding hunting because they're at least not talking to people if they're not able to go into the field, because some people be like, I don't really want to do this, even though I'm very keen on like learning things directly. Some people will still have a hesitancy to go into the field if they didn't do the hunter's education course, although there are some exceptions in media who will have a fully immersive experience. But I always tell people, if you want to learn about hunting, you can talk to the experts, talk to hunters at least, and learn from them. And we start to see a little bit of this narrative changing. Not every journalist is unfortunately on board with hunting, but more and more are starting to understand it. There was a great NPR piece a few years ago talking about the lack of hunters could actually lead to a diminishment of fees and conservation dollars. So some people get it, a lot of people don't. And some of them do go into the fields, but that's kind of a long-winded response to your question about me directly doing it. But I think I try to do it, and I encourage others in media to also do it too, even if they can't do every single thing directly.
Yeah, totally. Is this what led you into creating your podcast?
Partly because I realized like you can't always pitch an article because probably editors are working with a lot of content. Maybe you're like, I had my fill of working with one outlet and I want to try something new. And 2018, when I launched it, was just right on the cusp before everyone started doing a podcast. So I kind of recognized early, I'm like, I have to get on board this kind of medium. I'm not going to like it probably. Maybe it'll be weird. It'll probably be a learning curve. But jumping on board before everyone started to do it, especially women podcasters in the conservation and wilderness space, I think was to my advantage. And partly my desire to want to storytell and to explain issues, very complex subjects, I think led to my interest in starting the podcast. And I think even beyond writing, when you can have long form conversations, I think you can even be more effective than a traditional print or digital article. And for me, I was like, I could talk more and expand more because not every topic is going to be able to be published. Editors may not like your pitches. Editors may say, well, this is interesting, but it won't really fit our theme or really won't fit our mission statement. So a podcast can come in and help fill the void on topics that are not able to be published or maybe published immediately. So I could post an episode, and I know you do the same thing too. Every podcaster does this. You determine your schedule, your posting schedule of when you want content to come out. I could schedule things months in advance if I wanted to, but I don't really plan so far in advance. But you can immediately publish something. So when I'm talking about an important current event story or a policy update, I can turn over pretty quickly within a few hours, maybe the next day or two. And I don't have to be, let's say, blocked, or I don't have to be, let's say, waiting for someone's permission. That's a better, I would say,
Yeah.
reasoning with that to publish content that I want on my terms that I think are amenable to the listenership. So I was like, there are not many people talking about policies, or they're talking about a policy in a very generic way. They're not talking about things in a very nuanced fashion. And for me, I was starting to see a lot of people, not so much hunters, but some hunters who may be more inclined to work with hikers and bikers and climbers who are not necessarily, let's say, opposed to certain restrictions on firearms. Or let's say maybe they agree with the government perhaps designating certain public lands as national monuments or national parks without consideration for public access. And when I was starting to see like Patagonia say that the Trump administration had stolen all public land, I was like, I don't think that's accurate. It's not because of my political orientation, but I was like, there can't be some validity to this claim. I want to see some proof. And I was looking to see that when they had this big monument review, national monument review under the Trump administration. That was one of the issues that kind of influenced me to start it. And just the other misinterpretation of what was happening at the Department of Interior at the time in 2017, 2018. And after this review of national monuments came out, it didn't sell any public lands. It just shrunk an enlargement that the Obama administration had done. It still kept the areas, Bears Ears National Park, Grand Staircase, or not National Park, National Monument, and the two controversial Utah ones. It still kept them in existence. It didn't erase them in totality. It just shrunk them to a more compatible, small compatible range of area. And there's debate over what is a small range or how big a president can designate a parcel of public land. And these national monuments already have to be federal lands. They already have to be federal public lands. They can't just be private lands that they designate as federal lands. So there's always debate over, are they designating private lands as public lands? What scope are they doing? Is the president limited in this authority? So that issue, among others, among misinterpretation of what the Endangered Species Act does and how that can impede delisting efforts. And people don't like delisting because oftentimes hunting is considered a form of management when it is returned to the states, when a bear or a gray wolf is recovered, and the states are more equipped to manage the season for that, or to implement a management program for those species in particular. And so when I saw just the outrage, kind of misinformation, the ignoring of wildlife management science from trusted biologists who said, actually, this is okay, or when it comes to the enlargement of national monuments, actually, maybe the presidential authority has to be limited. Maybe President Obama at the time over exceeded his authority, designating millions of acres. And there's a lot of kind of caveats with that. I don't have to bore your listeners with that so much, but they can listen to my podcast to talk about, or to learn about national monuments. And so just a misinterpretation of issues, maybe a misunderstanding of what was happening in Washington. And some of your listeners probably didn't agree with everything the Trump administration did. But on our issues, when it comes to conservation issues, I had never seen a presidential administration bring more hunters and anglers to the table. I don't really see that right now with the Biden administration. They say, yes, hunters and anglers have a seat at the table, but they're doing policies like not respecting no net loss in Alaska. I just saw a story that said that they want to cut off caribou hunting on millions of acres of land, and that is not considered an attack on public lands by some of the same people who were saying that the previous administration was attacking public lands, yet they didn't shrink anything to the point of obsolete kind of standing. The national monuments still exist, they were just smaller. But now we see an actual attack on public lands that impede hunter and angler ability to fish on this, let's say in Alaska. And then there's also a potential lawsuit the administration may settle with a very notorious anti-hunting group called the Center for Biological Diversity to cut off hunting and fishing opportunities on national wildlife refuges, on 100 or so of them opened 2.3 million acres to new hunting and fishing opportunities. And so when you hear people not challenge that, or you hear kind of this one size fits all narrative placed on different issues, I was like, this doesn't settle with me very well, and I need to offer a counterpoint. I need to offer more information, and I cite both sides. Even if I reach my own conclusion that disagrees with the main policy, I lay out both sides so people know what exactly the people who are trying to push one policy do, what the opponents do, and then where I fall into that category as well. And you don't really get that. You get on a lot of conservation podcasts like, this is accepted fact, this can't be challenged. If you challenge this, you're anti-public lands. And I'm like, there's more nuance to saying someone is for public lands, not for public lands. But what if you're for public lands, allegedly, and you're promoting policies or not exposing policies that actually take away public lands access? So it's kind of a matrix with all that. So I was just frustrated by the lack of attention to detail. I figured with my unique position close to Washington, D.C., my connections with people on Capitol Hill, members of Congress and their staff, and people all across the country. Then at the time, I had a lot of contacts within the Department of Interior. I don't unfortunately have that right now. Maybe in a few years' time I will. But I was able to have really unfettered access, even as a freelance journalist, to talk to people who effectuate policy. And I was in a really lucky position. And they talked to other people. They had often told me they wish there were more journalists like me who would talk to them directly, not misconstrue their words, and really present what they were trying to do. And so I think you have to question certain things. You don't have to take everything for fact. It's not like you have to deny everything is fake news. I'm not of that perception. I think there are certain things that are controversial or that are questionable, and they do need to have an alternative viewpoint to let people make their assessment, like let people form their own opinions. But if something is so egregious and it's not being challenged, someone has to say something. And I was probably one of the few to talk about different issues, like I said, with national monuments, Endangered Species Act reforms, and no net loss, and other areas like that. So it's important. And I hope more podcasters do that and don't just take the accepted opinion from your favorite celebrity conservation podcaster and not say, well, maybe they're wrong here, or maybe there's something more to this position. And it's okay to have differing views. We are not all the same. I think even among like-minded people in conservation, we can have our differences with approaches. Maybe you have a different hunting style you like. Maybe you like private land hunting versus public land hunting. Maybe you like both. I think I'm kind of like an ecumenical promoter of different forms of hunting. I really don't care what people do. And I think as a observer into this, and a reporter, I think you have to support all forms. And that's what the podcast does too. All forms of hunting, all forms of fishing, as long as you're doing it ethically, legally, and you're having fun and you're not impeding people's ability to do it. And I think too many people also in conservation media sometimes are very, how would you say, uh, very controlling over what is to be accepted, what is not to be accepted, types of hunting or fishing. And I think as long as people are enjoying the sport, we have to welcome all forms of hunting. And why limit yourself to one style? I feel like I'm a better angler now that I know how to fly fish and then do also bait and spin cast fishing. And eventually, once I become very, very comfortable with rifle shooting, I hope I can do bow archery down the road. I don't think you should limit yourself. So the podcast covers topics that are not reported correctly or accurately, wanting to call for more nuance, and then just embracing all forms of hunting and fishing, not limiting any participant.
Yeah, I totally agree. It's really interesting. I love public land debates because the concept of what public land is and how it's meant to be used actually people don't and this is a whole podcast in itself, so I'm not going to go down this road, but like the idea that
Right.
what public land is doesn't actually line up with what people actually believe in because like you said, it's nuanced. It's woven. You
Mhm.
can't just blanket statement it. One of the things that connected you and I is this last fall when the state of Washington Fish and Game Department had issues, and they all of a sudden they canceled the spring bear season, and then the governor left a bunch of seats open, and there's been a lot of drama around
Mhm.
spring bear. Um,
Yes.
are you have you been writing about this or taking it up in other regards about sportsmen in the state of Washington kind of got the shaft? Not kind of. They got
They
the
did.
shaft from the board of directors for Wildlife
Mhm.
Commission and everything that went on with our governor, who is still under emergency powers here in the state of Washington over 2 years ago, and the Congress has yet to take it away from him.
Yes, I spoke to one of your best bear advocates, Douglas Bose. I spoke to him actually on the podcast, and he was able to share his perspective on what was happening with the politicization of these wildlife agencies. And I think some people who don't think elections have consequences, because these are not elected people, these are people that elected officials select and approve without really any consultation to the wider public. In certain states, and I know people may not like hearing this, but in more Republican states, oftentimes the commissioners are more aligned with hunter interests. That's objectively true. In states where there are more Democrat leaning governors, in the case of Washington, you have a lot of administrators and representatives who are not largely aligned with hunting. And I think that was evidenced in what happened with the spring bear vote in Washington state, in your state recently. And who these people appoint is extremely important. And oftentimes when you see these defeats, it's really lamentable the fact that Washington state, even with the available science saying yes, the spring bear hunt is justifiable, it's needed to keep the population in check, and without it, it's going to cause chaos. And even with them blatantly ignoring science, they think, well, we're the moral authority, we can do whatever we want. We'll just ignore the science because it's inconvenient to our narrative. But even in states like Washington, actually, Washington is starting to become kind of center ground for. There's a movement to remake wildlife agencies, and actually, they're starting to test it in Washington state. Maybe this is a result of these efforts. I forget the name of the group off the top of my head that is doing this, but this group to remake or reimagine wildlife agencies to put preservationists who are very much opposed to hunting is starting to be experimented with in Washington state. And I will find you the group, and you can shout it for your listeners later. But I saw this and I was like, this is not surprising to me that these kind of nonprofit organizations, these special interest groups, are trying to influence governors whom to select and to pick people who are very much against established science, pointing to hunting as a effective conservation management tool. And you have to look at that. And I don't know the feasibility of Washington state electing more pro hunting individuals to office. Maybe this year will prove interesting. Maybe you guys will defy kind of convention and do that. But in states where it's possible, you can hold those members to account. Like here in Virginia, I trust that my governor will will have already appointed. I think we still have some holdover commissioners, and even under we had a different political party in charge. We had 8 years of Democratic rule, but they put in people who are not very extreme, which was very encouraging to me and very refreshing. Now we have a Republican governor, and he's kept a lot of those commissioners. And I have no doubt if their terms expire very soon, he will appoint probably pro hunting individuals to serve on Virginia's Department of Wildlife Resources board, commission board. And so I know with my governor for the next 4 years, there are people that I could talk to, I could send an email to if I have questions about rules changes, and I know that they're going to represent my interests. Washington state may not have that luxury, unfortunately, because of who was elected. And so, yes, that's where I think people who may have been previously apolitical maybe were like, I trust this. I'm kind of like an environmentalist. I don't really want to rock the boat. I don't want to anger my friends in hunting and biking or in camping and biking. I want to just be friends with everyone. It doesn't mean even if you take a different position, you have to hate anyone or be vehemently angry towards anyone. But when you start to see hunting seasons eliminated, maybe it's going to be a force multiplier for people to maybe reject some of their apolitical positions, maybe to recognize that if you be complacent and just wish that for the best and wish for hunting to be respected, that's not effective. You have to be proactive. And several conservation groups were very, very late to the game. I won't name which ones, but I think it's obvious which ones I'm kind of alluding to. But certain conservation groups, which purport to be for hunting, were waiting until it was comfortable and socially acceptable to support a spring bear hunt because they were pressured to do so. Great that the pressure worked. It shouldn't take kind of a last minute ditch effort for them to change their mind and to say, yes, we're going to support this because we're very nervous about angering our friends in the environmental space. But it's unfortunately going to take loss of hunting seasons for people to wake up on this. And it doesn't matter what your politics are, if you're on the left or if you're on the right. If you care about hunting and you see these interests doing it, your politics don't matter. Kind of like with the debate over public lands. Understandably, that brings people of both sides together. And there are definitely some concerns when public lands are under attack. But when this comes before people, sometimes there's silence from these public land advocates. They don't support all of the above type of hunting. And that is very, very shameful. Although I think more are coming around to doing it. But this is where hunters should be able to come together and push a big media campaign. You don't need millions of dollars to support hunting in the public square, in media. You can write op-eds. It's free to do it. You just pitch a editor, and if they like what you have to say, you don't have to pay any money to get your article pitched into newspapers or to go on podcasts or news outlets or talk to local TV, whatever. And I think this is a teachable. California is mulling some restrictions to hunting again. They were trying to do that with California bear hunting. A great group that is starting to kind of help coalesce people together is Howl for Wildlife. They're a really good group, new. There's also Sportsmen's Alliance, Safari Club International, Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, lots of different organizations that are working and advancing the interests of sportsmen and women. And I often quote and speak to their leaders, often for articles and for podcasts, because I know they're on the cusp of this battle. They're seeing things directly. They can talk to me unfiltered and not worry about having to have their speech suppressed. I can communicate their perspective more easily than sometimes a traditional media outfit would be able to communicate a story. They may interview these individuals and then they may never run the story. But I think people can go through reporters and writers and podcasters like me and tell their story. And that was a really important story, the Washington bear hunt. And I was happy to talk about it on my podcast, even though I don't live in Washington state. But I tell people everything that happens, whether it comes from the federal government or you see a loss of hunting in a different state, it could be exported to another state, maybe adopted federally. You don't know. So you have to be vigilant and you have to always be with what they were doing in your state and prevent that type of politicization of wildlife.
Yeah. It's the domino effect is a real thing, and it sucks that hunters constantly have to be on defense rather than being able to be on offense. I think one of the things is hunting and fishing is not in the state constitution in the state of Washington. I think a lot of these states around the nation, people just take it for
Yeah.
granted. Like, no, hunting and fishing can actually be written
Yes.
into state constitutions that they can't be
Mhm.
attacked and taken down. And yet, in these states where they're not, look what's happening.
Right. Yeah, there are 23 states currently that allow the right to hunt and fish. There is the right to fish in 23 states plus two more. That would be also Rhode Island and California honor the right to fish, but not the right to hunt. So California and Rhode Island allow or afford residents the right to fish. And maybe enough interest among the Washington state voter bloc to urge, I don't know how Washington state's legislature does it, but in most states, the legislature has to pass legislation to create a ballot initiative to put the right to hunt and fish on the ballot. That may take a bit of legwork, but if there's enough people to do that and you have people in both chambers of your state legislature interested, I don't know if that's the case in Washington state currently, then you can do that. It's even really difficult in places like Montana. Montana is obviously a very pro hunting, pro fishing state. They have some sort of enshrinement of the right to hunt and fish, but it's not strong enough.
And so they want to go a little further in some of the work I've done there. And you have to have a supermajority in order to pass certain things so it can go onto the ballot. But even in that state, which is run by pro-hunting majorities, you still have a little bit of opposition with that as well. And so it's just, there are means that you could do it. Like I said, I know it's challenging, but electing people who support hunting is very important. And I don't know politically if that's going to take off, if there's an interest where people who could win campaigns are, their top issues are supporting hunting and keeping wildlife management in place. Maybe that will be a movement that takes off. There are different issues that can catapult people to office. It depends on every state. It depends on the mood. It depends on the attitude. But I think elections are very, very important. And who you have in your governor's mansion or your state legislature is extremely critical and can have an impact, as you guys have seen in Washington state. So that's kind of what you have to take with it. But yes, researching right to hunt and fish amendments, maybe that could be an option down the road in states where it's a little harder to safeguard hunting rights and hunting privileges.
I love it. I love it. Gabriella, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast. I love how you talked about how anti-hunting groups like to fall under the category of preservation. And one thing I want all listeners to understand is preservation is not conservation. And there is a distinct difference between the two. Gabriella, what would you say hunting has done for you in your soul and in your life?
Well, in the times I've been able to do it, I have found myself to be at peace. I've made a lot of friends in the process. I've been able to really enjoy my surroundings more, kind of deplug. Anytime I go on a really important trip, it doesn't matter if I'm hunting on private land or going out of state. Like my first deer was actually in Wyoming in the backdrop of the what is it, in the original monument, Devil Hill, not Devil Hill is what I'm talking about.
Devil's Tower.
Yes, I'm sorry, Devil's Tower Monument. I was when I hunted and got my first deer in the backdrop of Devil's Tower Monument in that portion of Wyoming, a very beautiful portion of Wyoming. I made sure, whether there or here in Virginia, anytime I go hunting, I always turn my phone off. I always tell people, do not bother me. I want to enjoy my hunting trip, because I see so many people, even on fishing or hunting trips, they're always turning their phone on. And they're wanting to like check for the latest bars in terms of reception area. And I'm like, I don't like to do that. So hunting, much like with fishing, affords me an opportunity to really be attuned to my surroundings. And I have limited interference from digital distractions. And once I'm done and I've been successful, I will be able to check social media after the fact in a better reception area. And so it's something you want to work with. So it allows you to be at peace, to really immerse yourself in your surroundings more. You could have great meals, you can tell stories, and you get to learn something. Like with hunting, I've been able to do more things on my own, and I've been able to do field dressing. I know for most people it's kind of icky to like touch organs and to do, remove the skin and remove fur and do all this. But for me, I've been challenged more to do it on my own and not worry about cutting myself, with the knife, because knives are very sharp. You have to be very careful where you're cutting and how you're maneuvering the animal to properly debone it or to properly extract organs and such. But I've been able to learn how to be more resourceful. If heaven forbid I'm trapped in the middle of nowhere and I don't know what to do, and I have some essential tools and I have to harvest an animal within the season, I know how now to properly field dress an animal compared to other people. So I would be able to survive a little bit in the wild with some of the skills I've been able to pick up with field dressing and hunting.
I love
Things
it.
that.
I love it.
So even with being so close and growing up close to the city and urban outposts, like even I could somewhat survive in the wild with the skills I've been able to pick up. So it's wonderful, and I want to do more of it. I don't get to do as much as I'd like to. This year has been crazy in a good way so far with my business. I have to travel, so that limits my ability to hunt as much as I'd like to. Although fishing is a little easier, I'm going to be going to West Virginia across the border to do my part in the gold rush, which is this big stocking opportunity the state of West Virginia does to have anglers try their luck of catching golden rainbow trout, which are beautiful trout. One of my favorite species. They're really not different from a rainbow trout, but they're just so beautiful with that bright yellow and the lateral pink line. And they really pull up a great fight. And so I'm going to try my hand at that. I get to do more fishing because it's a little easier, but I'm hoping this upcoming season, in the fall especially, I think I have some more windows of opportunity to go hunting. I hope to be able to go into the field. My dad got his hunter's education, so he taught me how to fish. I'm trying to help him learn how to do all the hunting stuff together, in terms of how to prepare, how to train, how to do things. And so I love doing hunting with my dad. I hope I get to hunt with friends. It would be fun one day to hunt with a significant other. Maybe that'll happen sometime in the future. But it's hard to find guys who like to hunt and fish here in the DC area, unfortunately. But you don't have to pity me. I'm strong and I can do things myself and find people to go hunting and fishing with. But ultimately, I would love to be able to be married to someone that I could do that with. And that's what I hope to do in the future. But I think just immersing people more, and bringing more people into this sport would be super great to do. I think people are missing out. I have a lot of friends who just get stuck in their ordinary kind of schedule. They're going to the same bars, they're going to the same hangout places, they're really not exploring their surroundings. And now everyone is noticing the cost of meat is going up. And they're like, what can I do to ameliorate these problems? I tell them, well, you can go grocery shopping yourself without the middleman. Go
Right.
hunting. It's inexpensive for the most part. It's a lot cheaper, all things considered, when you break down the pounds and your license fees and all that. It's actually quite cheaper to harvest a deer than it is to buy like a nice piece of steak or a nice piece of beef, things of that sort. So educating people in the cities would be something I want to do too, but hopefully I'm spending more time in the fields coming up as well. And then telling more people stories. I think that's extremely important with the platform I have to do that. I love telling underreported stories or misinterpreted stories and really giving those perspectives more attention. And yeah, there's so much I want to accomplish. I entered into my elk tag lottery. The lottery actually just closed recently. We will find out, all of us who applied, probably sometime, I forget, I think it's in May. We're going to find out who are the 5 winners of this first elk lottery tag. If I draw, I will be very astonished, but it would be interesting if that were to happen, or if my dad were to draw a tag. But maybe I could find myself, if I'm lucky, hunting for elk in October, mid-October, if I draw successfully for that. I don't think so, because it's like 100,000 people, I think, who entered the lottery. But who knows? Maybe this winter, or maybe this fall, I'll be able to hunt elk if I draw. And if not, I'll try to pursue some deer and some other related wildlife too. That's a little easier to hunt.
I love it. Well, good luck on that. Gabriella, how can people get in contact with you and follow you and check out your content?
Absolutely. A great portal if you're just like, you have too many things or there are so many ways to connect with you. The easiest thing I tell people is to go to my website, GabriellaHoffman.com. There you can find all my social media outlets. I have Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube, where I try to blog about my adventures. I actually have a vlog of my first deer that I got in Devil's Tower area in Hewlett, Wyoming. And I didn't hunt at Devil's Tower, but Devil's Tower was like way, way, way in the backdrop. I want to clarify that, of course, but it's within the vicinity. And that video I did got like 1,200 views, which was really cool. So I really loved cataloging that. So on social media, most of my handles are denoted by a blue check mark, super easy to find me. I write regularly for townhall.com. I sometimes write for Free Range American, which is related to Black Rifle Coffee Company. I've written there, not as regularly as I'd like to, but I've written there, and it's a great outlet to work with at times. I also am on the board of the Professional Outdoor Media Association, like I said. So you can, if you're interested and you want to get into outdoor communications, I would love to connect with you and help you on your journey. I can give great advice. I can serve as a mentor. I could tell you about our upcoming conference in Kalispell, Montana, and get you situated for taking a leap into outdoor communication. So if I can be a resource for your listeners, I would love to. I'm pretty approachable through email, through social media, happy to answer any questions. I'm always looking for pitches of interesting stories or hooks of some egregious abuse in hunting, what happened in your state, of course, and then positive stories too. I think we focus often on negative stuff. I want to look for good stuff too, and good people to speak with. So that's kind of my elevator pitch for how to connect with me.
I love it. I love it. Well, Gabriella, thank you so much for coming on this episode and sharing your wisdom and insight with us. Everybody, go check out Gabriella. Go listen to her podcast. Get in tune with the politics of hunting. And thank you so much for listening. Be blessed, everyone. Know that life is happening for you, not to you. As always, everybody, freedom on and stay soulful. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love it if you could go ahead and give this a rating as well as subscribe. Also, you can check us out on Instagram under the Soulful Hunter Podcast. Make sure to tag us in pictures and posts and use the hashtag Soulful Hunter. To find out more about the Soulful Hunter Podcast, go to soulfulhunter.com and be sure to follow the podcast as we are going to be bringing you a lot of great information, insight, and changing lives through primal adventure. I look forward to connecting with you on the next episode. Stay tuned and stay soulful.